All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dennisha King, who will be giving our last webinar of our GSMI series. Dennisha and I go way back. We did our post-bac together at Oregon Health and Sciences University, and now we are second-year PhD students in neuroscience programs. I'm here at OHSU, and Dennisha is now at the University of Rochester. So today we're going to be going over the components of how to make a compelling and strong personal statement. If anyone has any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. And yeah, I think that's it. I will leave it to you, Dennisha.
Okay, thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Dennisha, and thank you for coming to our workshop. We're going to be talking about how to write an effective personal statement for STEM graduate school. Just a little bit about me. I'm a second-year PhD student in a neuroscience graduate program at the U of R. I study microglial development in the amygdala in non-human primates. As Jessica mentioned, I was a neuroscience post-baccalaureate scholar at OHSU. But during undergrad, I actually began on a pre-med track, and I was doing biochemistry research, and then I later switched into neuroscience. I graduated from Agnes Scott College in 2019, and I majored in public health and neuro. And altogether, I had 3 years of undergrad research, and that was a combination of both research intensive courses. So they had a lecture component and then a lab component. And then I also had a National Science Foundation summer research experience, and that was in biochemistry as well. I actually applied to graduate school twice. The first time I applied to one program, and after an interview, I was waitlisted. And then the second time I applied to graduate school, I applied to 10 programs. I got 4 interviews and 4 acceptances. And a little bit about me, I never took the GRE because I hate standardized exams. Okay, so before we even get into talking about the components of a personal statement, there are 3 key things that you should absolutely do first that will make your life easier. And if you listen to nothing else in the rest of this presentation, I won't even be mad because these right here are the gems. So the first thing you need to do is start by refining your CV or your resume. And this is important because you want to have all of your accomplishments on display. And these include honors from your undergrad. This could be department awards. If you were the keynote speaker at a conference, if you presented a poster, even if it was for a class, you want to make sure that you write all that down and that you have that information front and center in your mind. If you have any publications or received recognition in a publication, you also need to include that. So having your CV refined also helps you think about putting together your story and including your research experiences in a linear, logical way. And the second thing that you need that's important is that you have to think about how you're going to tailor your personal statement to each specific program that you apply to. And so you can't use the same generic statement for each school because you really want to communicate why you're a good fit for that program and why that program is a good fit for you. So you need to do your research on whatever program you're applying to. And there's a bidirectional relationship here. So to make yourself stand out more, you want to show that not only are you a good fit for that program, but that program is a good fit for you. And you can do that a couple ways. First, you can mention professors at that institution who you would actually like to do research with. And you could even include how their research might fit in with previous research experiences you had, or why their lab might be attractive to you. And you can also even talk about organizations that institution has that you'd be interested in joining. And this this is important because say an institution is like well known for a specific field or technique, you can even mention that. Like, for example, if a school predominantly does electrophysiology, that would be a perfect segue for you to talk about your previous ePhys experience. And if that's something that you're interested in continuing to do in grad school, I mean, that makes you a perfect fit. If you're someone who cares about diversity initiatives and community outreach, you could even talk about a program that specific institution offers and talk about how you would like to join and what you would do. For example, mentorship is something that's super important to me. And so in my own statement, I included a POC-centered organization that I saw on the U of R website. And I had one sentence talking about the Alliance for Visible Diversity in science and engineering and how I would join because I'd love to participate in some of their community service outreach initiatives. And lastly, you need to prepare a team of editors who is going to read your statement and give you good feedback. You need to be prepared to go through multiple drafts. I personally went through 12 drafts of my personal statement. And that's because I'm long-winded, as you will be able to tell throughout this presentation. And I get very attached to how I write things. And you need people who are unbiased, who'll be able to give good feedback on your statement. And so I would recommend at least another grad student, if you have access to a grad student and a professor that you really trust, because they'll have different views and be able to catch different things in your statement. And it would be really helpful to just have someone else with experience look through your statement. So in thinking about the personal statement, it's very important to your application because it allows you to share your story of how you got interested in science, which can really make you stand out and be unique. It also allows you to share your research experiences and your career goals. And you can discuss how this program specifically will benefit you. And you can also show how well prepared you are for graduate school. And so the personal statement is often read by a graduate admissions committee. So this is a group of faculty members in the specific program or department that you're applying to. And usually it's a mix of young and tenured faculty. The personal statement is a really good way for you to display proper science communication as well as your science writing skills, because a lot of the people reading your applications are not going to be privy to the specific science jargon that you might want to use. They might be in a slightly different subspecialty field. And it's important that you're still able to communicate your research in a way that they understand what you did, the point of it, and how you grew from that as a scientist. So that's also really important in your personal statement. But we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. Okay, so what are the components of a strong personal statement? Number one, your background and motivation. So in this portion of your personal statement, you need an introduction to who you are as a scientist. What got you interested in the science that you want to pursue? What's your story? This is where you include that information. And then you transition into talking about your research experiences. So what you've done and what you've learned. And you want to spend a significant portion of your statement going through that and talking about your research experiences. And then you want to transition into the program qualities. So why is this program attractive to you? What specific aspects of this program appeal to you? And why do you see yourself as a good fit? Or why do you see that environment as somewhere that you can thrive and grow and develop as a scientist? And you want to also have a clear objective. So why are you pursuing the PhD? And you can also use a few sentences to tie into the program qualities, but we'll get into examples later. Okay, so for your background and motivation, I just want to say it does not have to be cheesy. You don't have to be cheesy, okay? For a lot of first generation students, especially URNs like myself, I got into science because I thought I wanted to go to medical school. Obviously that quickly changed. But in my own statement, I also talked about why I chose to pursue neuroscience. And that was because as a kid, I lost my grandparents to Alzheimer's disease. And that got me interested in neurodegenerative disorders and especially in thinking about memory and cognitive function. So that's what got propelled me into the field of, and that's my motivation, and that was my background. So you really want to you think about like, how did you get interested in science? Were there particular classes you took? Are there certain questions you're interested in? Why are you interested in the specific research field? What is it about or why that you find fascinating? What obstacles have you overcome that show your commitment and passion for science? Have you made any sacrifices in your pursuit of knowledge? Did you inspire others to pursue science? Did you start initiatives or volunteer for certain programs? You basically want to set up your narrative so that whoever's reading your application understands why you're dedicated to your field. And you want to make your background flow in a linear or chronological fashion. So you're telling a story in essence, and how your story needs to go is, okay, this is what happened and this is what inspired me, so I want to do XYZ. And that's basically going to be your whole background and motivation component. Now, for your research experiences, here you want to demonstrate that you've already gotten a taste of what it's like to be a scientist so that you know you're prepared for how rigorous grad school is going to be, because grad school is hell, okay? So they want to know, whoever's reading your application wants to know that you've at least had some basic experience, and so that you're not going to get into your first month of grad school and drop out because you're in shock of like what's going on. You know what I'm saying? So in this part of your personal statement, you need to show that you're a capable scientist already. And that's to say, you're not expected to know everything, but you at least have to have something to start with. So you need to first reflect on, for whatever research experience that you had, what did you learn? So this could include experimental techniques, what your results were, what your results taught you, any questions that you had from whatever research project you completed, or if you are someone who's interested in continuing work in that specific field, you want to also include that. So you want to talk about hard technical skills. So say you did an ELISA, say you were doing EPHIS. These are strong technical skills, and you can feel free to mention that. If you did a FRET assay, any kind of technical skills that you learned in the lab, it's perfectly fine. If you did a Western blot, perfectly fine to include that. And you also want to talk about soft skills, and these are teamwork, creativity. So if you had a group project, a group research project, and together you guys did a poster presentation, which you presented at a conference. That's also awesome to be able to talk about that, talk about what skills you learned from that experience. And so during graduate school, there's going to be tons of factors out of your control that you have to adapt to. And so you want to really demonstrate that you have the experience adapting to unforeseen complications, and that's going to make you a stronger candidate. So for example, if in your first research experience, your data didn't turn out how you expected it, you can talk about that briefly. Say your results, you couldn't get a clear analysis of what your results meant. You can always talk about that. Say there was a mistake in the data. You can talk about that. For example, in one of my research experiences, I spoke about how we had to troubleshoot getting our mice to absorb the ethanol concoction that we had, because we were studying alcohol use on depressive-like and anxiety-like behaviors in the mice. But of course, mice are super smart, and they're not going to drink something that like smells weird to them. So that was an interesting experience. And I talked about how I had to go back into the literature and see what other people were doing. And then from there came up with a new idea. So the more you're able to talk about your research experiences, especially how you troubleshot through difficulties, the better. It's going to make you stand out. So you want to really show mental fortitude instead of telling. So instead of saying like, all right, I'm strong, I'm prepared, you have to show that through talking about your research experiences and walking whoever's going to read your application through what happened and what you learned. You want to give each research experience at least 2 paragraphs. Um, do keep in mind that it is quality over quantity. So if you have more research experiences that will fit, you should pick the ones that are most impactful to you. So you start off by introducing the project or question that you were investigating. And you can talk about what is interesting about this problem. So if it's something that's new in the field, this project fits into the field because it addresses a gap in XYZ, right? You want to provide basic, short background to understanding the problem. What was your part in the project? What methods did you use, learn, or develop? So in this part, you want to really make sure that you're talking specifically about what you did. So what techniques you learned and what you did and what the results of that were. So you also want to be able to demonstrate initiative. So in thinking about how you problem solve, as well as how you navigate throughout the lab space on your own independently. And then you want to think about what problems occurred and how you solve them. They love to read about overcoming obstacles. We love that. And then you want to think about what the results were and why that might be exciting. So even if it's negative data, that can also be interesting because that'll speak to your critical thinking skills and what that might mean. Or you can even use this as an opportunity to say, well, even though we didn't get this, I think that we can do X next, test whatever it is you're talking about. And then you want to talk about your conclusion. That could be that this motivated you to pursue other questions. So this one experience inspired you to do another research experience or something like that. So this is also a great space to talk about any publications or manuscripts that came out of this research experience, or if you won any awards. Again, if you presented a poster from this research experience, you should also include that here. If you were chosen to be a keynote speaker, include that. If you got an award, include that. For example, during my undergrad, I won this research award at my institution because I literally had spent the most hours in the lab out of the entire department one summer doing research. And so I won an award for that. So if there's these cool little niche awards at your own undergraduate institution, it put it in there. It's great if you want something that's related to your research experience, go ahead and include that. Okay. So now you want to talk about program qualities and specifically focusing on why the program or the department or the institution appeals to you. And you want to think about, are there specific resources? Like, does it have an EM core? Are there collaborations there that happen very frequently? You also want to think about location because that's very important. Grad school does not pay much. You get a livable wage, but that money will go farther depending on where you're located. And so you don't want to be starving and struggling. So you should definitely think about the location. If you met a PI at a conference or at a seminar, they were invited to do a talk at your school, and that's why you're interested in the program, you should absolutely mention that. You should definitely have at least 2 to 3 specific faculty members whose research interests honestly interest you. And I would say that my tip for how to do that is my research experiences kind of followed a trend. And so since I focused a lot about neurodegenerative diseases and neuropsychiatric disorders, because that's what I'm interested in, I specifically looked for professors at the institutions I was interested in that did research along that theme. And then that's how I was able to tie my entire personal statement together. So how you go about doing that is basically going on lab websites to see which faculty are in the program or in the department. And I would say one thing, I mean, it is kind of a lot of work, so do this within reason, but don't just name drop these professors. You want to say something that's of substance. So I would say the best way to do that is maybe read their most recent publication coming out of their lab, because some of their websites can be old and out of date. So they probably have projects on there that they're not even working on anymore. So I would say look that person up in PubMed, look for their most recent lab publication, and then be like, okay, I saw in this paper that they did XYZ research, and I'm really interested in that research. And here's how I feel I would be a strong candidate to join their lab. Something to that effect. So here's an example. Dr. Simon's lab is at the interface of chemical biology and investigating RNA biology. And I wish to contribute to the creativity in method development of these techniques. Something simple. You don't have to go into too much detail. But it is important to know that you're interested in multiple labs in the program in the event that that particular lab isn't taking new students. So you don't want to limit yourself or box yourself in by saying you only want to go to one lab or one PI at that institution, because if they're not taking any students, or if they don't have funding, or if other people in your class end up like joining that lab before you, then you're going to be out of luck and they're going to throw your application away. So make sure it's at least 2 to 3 labs. I would say above 3 labs, but you only really need to mention 2 to 3 labs in your personal statement. I will say that I'm speaking from a strictly neuroscience perspective, because at least this is how my applications went, but I do recognize that other STEM fields do differ in size, or you apply directly to the lab. So you should definitely ask your mentor how to best select labs, and that will be a different conversation. I just want to quickly note that you can also use this opportunity to also talk about, again, program or institution specific things that also stand out to you and that you care about, because you're not just a scientist, you're more than that. There are other aspects to your identity. So if joining an organization that cares about diversity and community outreach is super important to you, and you go on the program website and you see that, feel free to mention it. Okay, so you do want to have a clear objective, and that is, what do you plan to do with your PhD in your STEM field? And so graduate school will definitely open the path to careers that require skills learned from rigorous scientific training. And it's important to know why you want to take on this challenging journey, because it's a long time to be in school. And so you can think about, like, you love your field and you're great at research, but why do you need a PhD? And the program invests training in you. So you have to signal to them that you're going to be committed. You're going to take it seriously. You've thought about what aspects of that program appeal to you. And you have strongly considered that you will also be a good fit for that specific program. Keep in mind, you're not bound to whatever you say 5 years from now, because interests and goals absolutely change. But I just want to caution, some programs still have administrators that are dinosaurs, meaning they're a little bit outdated in their thinking. So they don't necessarily want to read that someone wants to go straight into industry. A lot of times, most PIs are trained to be a PI, so that's the extent of their training. So they want to train you to also be a PI, a principal investigator. So I would caution against explicitly saying in your application that you want to go into industry as opposed to teaching or an academic path. I would say instead focus on specific things about that research and what you can do with that. Like, for example, wanting to think like an independent scientist, want to run a lab as a long-term goal, things like that. With that being said, I'm going to take a little break and ask for questions. So I'll take any questions.
All right, we have a couple questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you can see them, Dennisha, but I can definitely read them to you.
I can see it.
Okay. You can start whichever one.
Okay. I absolutely understand. Okay, so I'm gonna
yeah, can you say what the question is?
Okay, yeah, okay. That'll probably be the best. So this first question says, among Latin community, it is a quality being humble. This, yeah. How do you start writing about yourself? I definitely understand what you're saying because I think as underrepresented minorities going into a white male dominated field, as in pursuing research, it's definitely difficult to talk yourself up. But that's why I recommend starting with figuring out how to perfect your CV. And that's important because if you already have worked on your resume or CV, you'll have a list of all of your accomplishments, all of your awards, all of the professional societies you've been able to join, all of your publications, whatever posters you've done. So if you have that in the front of your mind while you're writing, you'll be able to weave that into your story. And it's not so much, you have to think about it like this. Through your personal statement, you're basically marketing yourself, so to speak, before they meet you, before they even extend an interview to you. So all you have to represent yourself and represent all the hard work that you've done is that personal statement. So it is difficult to, brag on ourselves. I still have trouble doing that. So I prefer like when people brag on me because that makes me feel good. But if you have all these accomplishments already written down on your CV, it's very easy to now incorporate that into writing. And you don't necessarily have to brag on yourself like, oh, I like have this many publications, or oh, I did this. Like, no, you first start off by talking about your research experience and then say, okay, this research experience culminated in a poster presentation. And when I presented this poster at blank conference, I won the award for best poster, something like that. So personally, when I read that, I don't necessarily see that as bragging per se, because that's actually what happened. It's factual. So that's how I would address that. But also when you have somebody else who knows you review your statement, like I would say a boss or a professor who's worked with you in the past, they can also recognize that and point it out and be like, hey, this would be a good opportunity to brag on yourself in this way, mention this publication or mention that. So you want to make sure you're presenting as strong as a candidate as you can be. That was a long answer. I hope that was helpful. There's another question that says, I heard that you're not supposed to go into materials and methods in your personal statement. Is including the techniques you learn too much in the weeds? Okay, so there's a balance. As with everything, too much of anything is going to be disorienting to your reader. So when I say you can briefly mention your techniques, for example, when I was talking about my own personal statement for the research that I did at OHSU, I talked about using analyzer, and I said I was looking at DAPI and Hoche dyes, and I was studying how those affect DNA, how DNA bends. So that was important to mention for the story, for what specifically I was talking about, but don't go just name dropping all the methods you did, because you're also going to be submitting your CV, and that's all going to be listed in your CV as well. So you want to briefly mention materials and methods that's necessary to the story, because then you want to say like, oh, like, and from these experiments, I saw this result, and that made me curious about whatever comes next. So you want to just give them enough to show that like you're competent and independent in a lab setting, but you don't need to get too deep into the specifics, is what I would say. You want to make sure that someone who's not directly in that field can be able to read what you're saying and understand. So dial down on the jargon. That would be my advice. There's a question that says, can I only mention academic reasons when I refer to the location of the university? I would say no, because it should be a combination, because again, you're more than just a scientist. And like I said, from my own personal experience, I not only talked about the research at that school, I also talked about an organization called ADSI that I wanted to join and what I would do there as a URM who prioritizes mentorship opportunities. So definitely you can use the opportunity to talk about different aspects of that program. The more you have, the better it seems that you're going to be a good fit for that program, and that'll make you unique. There's a question where it says, would you mention all 3 faculty members that you're interested in, or would you just focus on one professor's research? I would briefly mention all 3, and that's what I did. I had a brief, I think about 2 to 3 sentences per person, and I briefly described what their research was, their main research focus was, and how that theme fit into what I was interested in and what I wanted to do, and how I could see myself being a grad student in their lab. So I kept it very brief, very short and to the point, but I did mention all 3. Are you allowed to talk about your volunteering activities in your statement? If it's important to your story, I think yes. I think I like to say that your story needs to have like a nice flow to it. So you want to have a narrative and make it easy to read. So if your volunteering experiences fits into how you got interested in wanting to be a researcher, or it's important to your identity, then go ahead and include that if it's meaningful to you and makes sense for the story you're trying to communicate. Because one, you have a limited space. You don't have that much words to get across what you want to communicate. So you don't want the reader, whoever is reading your application, to get lost in your story and lose the meat of what it is you're trying to say. So I would say, go ahead and include it if it's important to you and it's in line with the story you're trying to portray about yourself. And with that, we're going to continue on. There's going to be more opportunities along the presentation to answer questions, but I want to just keep track of time so that I don't go over everyone's time. It is Friday night. Thank you guys for bearing through this presentation, but I will take questions again at another stopping point in the presentation. Okay, so for some writing tips, I recommend being honest about who you are. There's only one you, and the reader should be able to understand your scientific self. So do be honest. Avoid metaphors, quotes, cliches. I'm going to save the world. Generic sentences like science is amazing. Sweetie, you're not going to save the world, but you can try. It's okay to start writing this way, but please don't. If you can avoid it, don't. Everyone has a preferred writing method, so do stick to what's best for you. Do you need to say your ideas out loud? Do you need to set break times? I recommend bouncing ideas off to a friend. That'll be good. Do ask professors, mentors, and peers to critique your personal statement. And I would say around 3 people in the science field is a good rule of thumb. So again, I'd recommend older, more experienced grad students and a PI, at least one PI, at least one professor should review your statement. So you can also have a skilled writer edit. So if you have a writing center at your institution, do go there and seek services. Some additional tips is double and triple check for typos. That is not cute when you're reading something and it's a big error, because that just shows lack of care, really. So make sure you're checking for typos, proofread for repeating words. And this is very simple, but do check that the university or the department program names in your statements are correct, especially if you're going to name drop, because that would be so embarrassing that you have the wrong university name on your statement and you submit that to a different university. No, don't do that. You can reuse your personal statement by changing a few details. Example, your professors of interest, the program name, but make sure you're you double and triple check that you did that. And then you save your version with the institution name for each school you apply to. And that's going to be really helpful if you're applying to more than one school. I had 10 applications, so that was very helpful for me to save the institution name in the application name. Therefore, I avoided making those types of errors. Do not list everything on your resume or CV in your statement, because again, they're going to ask for one. But you do want to convey your personality and passion. Do display clarity and confidence. you want, even if you're not a confident person by nature, confidence is something that I'm working on, as well as science communication. You want to make sure that you're concise, that people understand what you're saying. Your writing is easy to read and flows. And you don't want any unnecessary stories that's going to distract. You want to be straight to the point and get your story across. Don't focus on negative aspects. Do not say I may have not had a lot of research experience, but ... Research experience is the most correlative factor of succeeding or like completing grad school, but it's not the most important thing. Most institutions are going to look at your application from a holistic standpoint. Did you have any other opportunities, research seminars, senior thesis, online research courses? And I think that especially as a URM student, at least when I was in undergrad, I had 2 jobs. I was also president of several organizations at the time. So my research experiences were limited, but I didn't feel the need to talk about that. I just was like, whatever I'm going to submit is good enough and I'm good enough. Therefore, that program is going to accept me. So also, if you're someone who is not a 4.0 student, and I graduated with 3.4, so on my transcript, I had a D in inorganic chemistry and I had a C in a research statistics course. So I felt like I had to address that against advice that I received from other people, because they were just like, you don't need to say anything, but I do sympathize. But with how I chose to do that, I think it really bode well for my story in terms of my passion for research. So I'm going to give you an example of how you can spin a negative aspect. So this is straight from my personal statement. I said, I started seeking out research opportunities in each semester and realized that while I sometimes struggled during lectures, I excelled in all the lab portions of my science classes. I enjoyed learning how to navigate through research questions while troubleshooting in a more independent setting. So I basically addressed the fact that I had 2 grades that I didn't really like on my transcript through saying that, like, yeah, I struggled through the lecture portions, but my transcript also reflected that in all of my lab classes, I did well. So that fit very easy into my narrative. And then I also addressed the fact that for the first program that I applied to, I was waitlisted. And how I talked about that was that I was waitlisted due to my inability to articulate my research experiences. I chose to do a post-bac to improve my science communication, as well as my confidence in my identity as a neuroscientist. So that's 2 examples of how I was able to spin what I perceived as a negative aspect of myself. So don't be negative per se, but also if you feel like you have to explain certain aspects of your application, do so in a way that makes you end up being, that paints you in a positive light at the end. So, okay, even if I struggled in lectures, here I am excelling in lab, doing research, which is what's the most important thing. And even if I was waitlisted because I had trouble talking about my research experiences, here I am now working to improve that by doing something else. So you always want to end off painting yourself in the most positive light that you can. So some more considerations before writing: read other example statements. How have other people structured their story? You want to reflect on your own personal background, research experiences, accomplishments, and what your career goals are. And you also want to think about what your strong characteristics and attributes are. And you need to use examples. You need to show as opposed to telling people. And you want to communicate that you're persistent, you're creative, and you're resourceful. And you can really get at that through using examples in a research setting. Also think about emailing and talking to faculty and graduate students that you're interested in doing research with. I would say a really great way to go about doing that are attending conferences, which is kind of hard because COVID, but you can also email people. You can ask if they're still recruiting grad students, if their lab website is not updated. And with this, you can send a quick email just saying, hi, I'm really interested in your lab and the work you do. I was wondering if you'd be interested in accepting grad students in the upcoming year, something like that. So you can introduce yourself and your interest in their lab research and then reach out that way. There are blog posts on CL's website on how to email a faculty. So if you're curious on that, do check the CL website for the information on that. And you want to think about how common or required it is to do this. And that varies depending on what field you're in. So for some fields, you absolutely have to reach out to PIs way in advance of even sending your application in, or you won't even get an interview. But ask your mentor for advice because it does vary depending on if you're applying to physics versus neuroscience. And with that, I'll be stopping to take more questions.
Before you start, we do have a question from the YouTube live stream before it gets buried, and I will repeat it to you since you don't have the link. The question is, when writing personal statements, what should thematically come first? The part about yourself or the part of why you want to apply for the program?
I think that depends on what your style of writing is. I started off my personal statement by saying, I'm interested in studying neurodegenerative diseases in hopes to one day work on developing drug treatments for patients whose lives have been affected by neurodegenerative diseases. That's how I started my statement. And then I said, I hope to one day run a lab and blah, blah, blah. And then I went into my background. So I first started with big picture of like, in the long term, this is what I want to do. And then I transitioned into like what inspired me to get there. But throughout that, I followed a general theme, and that was mentorship. And I talked about how mentorship was really important to me because I would have never been successful if I didn't have the right mentors in my life. And I spoke about like how, as my identity being a Black woman and growing up in an underserved community and being first gen, I didn't have any examples of scientists. I didn't know that I could become a neuroscientist until I met a neuroscientist that looked exactly like me. And I was like, okay, wow, I can do this. I can do science as a career. So I would say it depends on what your stylistic preference is of how you do that. You can start big picture and then go into your background, how that plays into it, and then your research experiences. But my story flowed really well because not only did I talk about my background, but I talked about how that specific mentor changed my trajectory because through her, I got my first research experience. And then that research experience led me to another research experience because I was still curious in doing whatever research I could get my hands on. So that all depends on your style.
Yeah, I would also say it doesn't really matter the order. I think for me, I mentioned both of them. I mentioned a little bit about myself and why I wanted to apply to the program. But then again, at the very end of the statement, I mentioned again why I wanted to be part of the program. But that's a good segue into, there's a lot of questions revolving the next theme, and I'm actually going to lump most of them into one of them. And it's mentioning how to talk about hardships and personal statements, like how much is too much, how much is too little. Like you want to give context to whatever situations that you've been encountering to give the committee a more thorough, comprehensive understanding. And I know there's a couple of questions concerning like, if I talk too much, would it lead to rejection and so on and so forth. Dennisha, do you have any thoughts?
Personally, this is me being 100% transparent. I struggle with the idea of balancing between, talking about, how your hardships made you into the person that you are versus selling trauma porn, because I don't believe that every person should be privy to all the hardships that you've gone through. And especially when you're a URM, to me, it comes off as like, because I would say for the most part, a lot of the people that are going to be reading your applications are going to be white men. Let's just start there. So I personally don't really like the idea of like, I have to sell my pain and trauma to this person to get into grad school. So I think that there's a fine line. If the trauma makes sense in the context of you saying, okay, well, this inspired me to do X, Y, and Z, then I would include it. But if it's like, oh, like I had trauma and this is why I couldn't do X, Y, and Z, I would not include it. And that's why I like mentioned earlier, like I was someone who's working 2 jobs, like didn't have money, was poor, like that kind of thing. And I couldn't do as much research as some of my peers were doing because I had to work paid jobs. And I refuse to include that in my statement because I feel like, why should I have to like tell these people like, oh, here I was suffering and barely making it through college for them to accept me? You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's a fine balance in between what you should include and what you shouldn't include. But also, I think it is important that if the trauma is really important to your identity, then do include that. And my caution with that is if it's the right institution for you to be at, then that will bode well. If they do not respond well to you doing that, then you were never meant to be at that institution. So, and I would also say that if you're someone who has an underrepresented identity, do your homework about whatever institution you're applying to and find out from the grad students how they treat people of sexual minorities or different orientations, different skin tones, and different backgrounds, how they treat their international students. That is very telling. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I would say like the bottom line is if you don't want to leave whatever reader filling in gaps of knowledge. So for example, if let's say you had a family member who was hospitalized, you had to take care of them, and as a result, you failed a couple classes. It's okay to mention that. Just don't mention like a whole paragraph on it, just like 1 or 2 sentences or a half sentence is okay. If you want to explain why, let's say you didn't do so good one term, and you don't want the committee to think anything negatively of it. That's completely normal too. But yeah, we had a lot of questions on that, and it's a good thing you guys are asking this. Moving forward, should I mention only the research that I made with the people who are writing my recommendation letters? You don't have to. I think I mentioned research in my statement, but I didn't ask them for letters because it was quite some time ago. And again, Dennisha mentioned quality over quantity. And at that point, I had too many people to ask for letters. I had to pick and choose. So no, you don't have to. Dennisha, do you have any quick thoughts?
Completely agree with that. I included about, I want to say 4 or 5 research experiences, and most of them came from professors that I worked with in passing. And I only asked for recommendations for my like most recent research experiences because I had experiences all throughout undergrad. So I didn't ask for those recommenders because they also didn't really know me that well. It's kind of just like, okay, I'm in the lab for like this amount of time and that was it. So you don't have to ask everyone at all. There's one more question that I'm going to address before moving on, and then I'll get the rest at another time. But for the person who asked if this is a second time you're applying to grad school, do we need to mention it in the statement? I would say it depends. So if you have a gap in your timeline for when you first applied to graduate school and when you're now applying again, and you use that gap to strengthen wherever you thought you had weaknesses, I would say go ahead and mention it briefly, because that's what I did. I mentioned that I was waitlisted because I was unable to really talk about my research. And so I used that opportunity to strengthen my science communication skills by doing a post-bac. So if you have a gap in terms of like when you graduated and like you're applying again, I would say it's okay to mention that. And also if you're applying to the same school for a second time, it's okay to mention that, but then you also have to include how you improved and what you worked on. That's my tidbit for that. But now we're going to go more into some examples. So for the background and motivation, you need an introductory sentence that catches your reader, introduction to you and your field of interest. And you need a how you got here section. So a snippet of research experiences. And what do you plan on doing? So what are your goals? How do you plan on contributing to science? So example one, you have a general science quote as an introduction. This is just an example, okay? So almost all aspects of life are engineered at the molecular level, and without understanding molecules, we can only have a very sketchy understanding of life. Something interesting, something eye-catchy. I am applying to the graduate program in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology because I enjoy the stimulating academic research environment. I have found an area that I feel I can greatly contribute to, and my ultimate goal is to perform biological research and teach at the university level. So here you briefly mentioned your interest in the program and your overall goal. Okay, and in another example introduction, you can use a quote if you would like, that's tied into your research interest, and then you want to briefly mention your research interest. And I would just like to highlight that the person ended this paragraph saying, even after years of research experiences using these organisms, I can say that I'm just as excited about my work as when I started, and I'm just eager to learn more. That right there shows that you're someone who's really interested in that field, and that's what's fueling your drive to apply and further your studies. And in another example, again, you have an intro on the field of interest, how you got interested in that specific field, and how this program will help you achieve your goals. And so to end this paragraph, they said, with the opportunities afforded to me through a PhD, I hope to contribute to research in the field of sensory perception. And that right there is communicating to your audience how exactly this program is going to help you achieve your long-term goals and how you're going to get there. What are you going to use your PhD for? I'm just going to quickly skip over this questions portion because we're kind of running behind on time, but I will take questions again at the end. And here we're going to focus on the research experiences. So you need a summary of your research experiences and try to go in chronological order because that makes the most sense for your story and how you can connect them. You want to please mention relevant awards and publications because that really shows like, all right, this person is clearly like doing the work and they're getting recognition for it. They're doing well. You want to also include the goal of the research project, be focused and concise. You want to demonstrate initiative and ability to adapt to challenges. Briefly talk about your results. So what techniques or skills you develop, but be brief. Don't get bogged down by too many details or jargon. Think more summary or big picture things. And then conclude. So try to tie your conclusions to your current and future goals if possible. So for example, in this first research experience, this sophomore talks about, I investigated the role of oral stimulation of sweet taste on pancreatic insulin release in that person's lab. So they basically summarized the goal of the research project. What were they trying to do? What question they were trying to address with their research project? And here they include brief results. So we were surprised to find that a mouse model deficient for the T1R3 sweet taste receptor, despite being unable to detect sweet taste, produced a robust insulin response similar to wild type mice when licking sugar solutions. So there, it's very brief what the results were, but there's not too many jargon words, I would say, used here. Even though the person reading might not know exactly what that receptor means or what it does, we still get the clear picture of what happened here. And then they conclude what they talk about what the results suggested. And that's important. Just a note, if I'm going too quickly for the audience, these sample statements are also on our CL website. So if you are a scholar, you have access to this. Example, again, follows You talk briefly about what you did in whoever's lab you were at whatever location it was. And then you talk about what the lab generally does. Like here, they mentioned in recent years, the lab had found a novel gene, and that's important. Why is it important? Because when it's mutated, it causes seizure-like behaviors in Drosophila. So there you have it, the theme of the research. And then they talk specifically about their project and what they did. It's important to include what specifically you did and what you saw. So they include the goal, they include the methodology, and they include the results. And then they talk about the experience. So they end by saying, although it could be discouraging at times to have my project fail, I kept working on it because it was an important opportunity to impact human health through basic research in neurobiology. And so it's always important to surmise your research experience by ending on a note where you're saying like, even though I had some difficulty here, here's what I learned, and here's why I'm inspired to continue doing research, that is. And so in your closing paragraph, you want to communicate why this program. I cannot stress this enough, but to make yourself stand out in your personal statement, you have to communicate to whoever's reading your statement that you're a good fit for that program, and that program is a good fit for you. You have to make that stand out. So again, you want to mention whatever faculty you're interested in working with. You can even mention other scientific goals that the program will help you with. So teaching, outreach, if that's important to you, and the program has a teaching assistant requirement, good fit. If there are certain leadership positions, organizations at that institution that you see yourself joining, that you would be a good fit for, great fit. If there's groups and clubs on campus, great fit. And you want to also end on talking about the overall goal of obtaining your PhD. So, summarize with one clear, concise sentence. And so the general scheme that follows is why that graduate program, faculty you're interested in working with, specific interest in that graduate program, and overall goal. And again, there's more examples on our CL website. For the sake of time, I won't really go deep into this one, but do feel free to check out our website, and you can read the entire example statements all together. And we have a couple different ones across fields. So not just in biochemistry or neuroscience, there's physics on there as well. And with that, I'm going to stop quickly to take any questions in the group. Actually, that was a perfect segue. I'll be answering this live. So the question is, explain the difference between personal history and statement of purpose essay. And thank you for that, because we're going to do that right now. So the differences between a personal statement, statement of purpose, and a diversity statement. So I would just like to say the obvious at this point, but read the instructions of whatever application you're going to do, because this varies school to school. So some programs are going to ask you for a personal statement. Some programs are going to ask you for a research statement. Some programs are going to ask for you to combine it. And some will ask for it to be separated. So pay very close attention to what prompts they give you and what specifically they ask you to include. That goes without saying, reading is fundamental. But in your personal statement, you're looking back. So you're telling the story of the experiences that you had on your journey into getting into STEM. You are telling a story about your own special motivations for applying to the program and obtaining the degree. And so you address any possible flaws in your application if needed, and you show how you overcame these challenges, and you be descriptive. So this is very specific to your personal statement. Your personal statement needs to be personal. That's your personal story, your motivation for getting into science, getting into research, and why you want to continue down that career path. Now, your statement of purpose is looking forward. So these are your academic strengths and your research background. And you want to introduce yourself and your motivation, and specifically talk about your research here. So your project, your conclusions, your technical skills, your knowledge of the research field, and how you can use the current knowledge you have to build on future knowledge and then change or impact your field. What can you add to the scientific field as a result of you pursuing a PhD? And this is really where you communicate the way you fit with the program and how this program can help propel you into becoming the scientist that you want to be. And for a diversity statement, some programs will ask you for a diversity statement, and they usually have a general prompt, and that has to do with how does your life and research experience contribute to the diversity at the institution that you're applying to. And I just want to say, for the questions earlier that had to do with hardship, I would say if you fall into an underrepresented category, the diversity statement is also a perfect opportunity to mention how your specific struggles and experiences have shaped you into the dynamic person that you are. And I always, again, talk about my identity as a Black woman and as a first gen person, and how because of how mentorship like changed my trajectory, I want to be a mentor to other people, and I can do that by becoming a PI and having my own lab, and also through CL, doing the work that I do here now. So that was really important to me, and if that's something that's important to you, you can always use a diversity statement to say things like that. And if there's a specific prompt you want to describe an experience that really demonstrates your resilience, your perseverance, and your leadership skills in response to a challenge in any area of your life, this can be broad. You want to really discuss your past experiences that focus on diversity, which can be overcoming obstacles due to ethnic, racial, socioeconomic, or cultural barriers. I would like to also include sexual identities or orientations here as well. You also want to talk about leadership roles that focus on improving diversity and inclusion in the classroom, in school, or even your local community, because that's important as well. You can also talk about the importance of mentorship, because that's super important, and diverse role models in your life, and who you learn from, and what you will emulate from those mentors. You also want to discuss how you will improve diversity at the institution that you're applying to. So you can't just talk about your own identity as a diverse person. You also have to combine that with like, okay, I recognize that I am someone who came from hardship and struggle, and I have a very unique identity because of the way I present or the way I navigate through the world. But I'm going to use this identity to now do X, Y, and Z at this institution. And here's how I plan to give back. So that can mean you're going to join a specific organization, and you can always look on the websites for what those organizations do. Like if they're involved in, there's tons of programs at the U of R. For example, they have a program where they talk to called the Brain Awareness Campaign, and they talk to high school and middle school students, and they do experiments for them. And these students are in underserved communities, and so they go and they give back in that way. And so I talked about that because I was like, that's important to me. I value mentorship, so I would participate in this program and become a mentor to those scientists who are coming up behind me. So you want to talk about work you could potentially do with an outreach club to improve cultural diversity within the program and the overall school community or even the local community. You also want to talk about how you will continue a mentorship program for undergrad and grad students you identify with, that know you are facing similar barriers of imposter syndrome, access to resources, and etc. Okay, so what are the faculty looking for? In your personal statement, they want to see on display traits that will indicate a strong and prepared graduate student. And that's to say that they do fully recognize that you're not supposed to have all the answers. You're not supposed to know everything. As a grad student, you are still here to learn, but they want to know that you are prepared to navigate that space, because it is an extremely challenging environment. It is very hard. Sometimes it's very discouraging, especially if your experiments are not going right. So they want to know that you at least have some experience and you're mentally prepared to take on how difficult this journey through grad school will be. So they want to see this passion and dedication to science They want to see persistence, ability to overcome obstacles. They want to make sure that you can focus and you can adapt to a changing environment and that you're creative. So in your overall application, you do want to display your academic history, and this could be like what specific classes you've taken that make you appealing for your field. I, in my own personal statement, briefly mentioned a neurobiology course that I took in my sophomore year, and that how that got started, and how that got me started in my interest of neuroscience and pursuing neuroscience research, and how I learned so much from that class, and that got me passionate about doing research projects. So you can briefly mention that. And then, did you major in your field of interest, or do your research experience inform your field decision? For people who are career changers, so they might have started in a different field in undergrad, but decided to go completely left or right into a different research field, you can use that opportunity to talk about that in your personal statement. And to me, that's important as well, because that shows that this is something that you're really passionate about pursuing, because you made a whole career change to do it. So in thinking about the quality of the personal statement, you want to make sure that you're communicating well, especially the extent of your research experiences. And it's okay if you're not someone who had extensive research experience, that's fine. But if you even have 1 or 2 research experiences, you want to make sure that you can clearly communicate what happened there and what you learned. And that's super important with how you communicate science and how you talk about that, because you want to show a level of expertise where you are already confident that you have skills that you can build on. You have a foundation there to build on in graduate school. You also want to make sure that your letters of recommendations can corroborate your personal statement. So just to diverge a little bit from the topic, when you're asking recommenders for letters, you want to make sure that these are people who know you well. So these are people who know that you participated in other organizations, that you were an active member of your community. They can speak about some of your research experiences. They can speak about you holistically. You want to make sure that you're asking very specific people who can back you up and mention some of this stuff in your personal statement. So I would just say, for if you're asking people for letters, you can always include in your you can always include in your email certain things you want them to mention and have that align in your personal statement. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining our webinar. I'm sorry we went over time a little bit, but with that, I'll take any remaining questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dennisha, for giving all your advice. I answered some of the questions in the answered portion of the Q&A. And let me just check if there's not any on the YouTube live stream. There is one. Seems pretty straightforward. Can one mention undergraduate research experiences that were carried out during undergraduate studies? Yes. So anything before grad school. So this would entail stuff you did in undergrad, stuff you did as a research technician after you graduated, or a lab manager. Anything applies, even if you volunteered as well. And just to recap some of the stuff that I put in the chat, Project Short is another organization that does things similar to us, with the only difference is that they also focus on medical school and I believe law school. They do personal statement reviews. Please check them out if you are interested. I also linked our writing center. There are many examples we have up there for personal statements and research statements of different fields. Sometimes it's really hard to even get started writing, or even if you have been writing, it's normal to feel stuck. And sometimes most people go around that by just reading more examples and helping that writer's block go away. We do have one question. Should we mention our lack of extensive research if we had to work to pay for school? Should we mention this and what we are doing research now to gain experiences despite this setback?
I would say no. If you do have at least 2 research experiences that you can really describe in detail, which it sounds like you do, I would say don't even mention that, because really and truly, quality over quantity. And if you can do a really good job of articulating the science you did, what you learned from that, and why that's inspired you to continue wanting to pursue a PhD, and that's super meaningful. For me personally, I felt like I didn't have enough, so I did a post-bac, and then I talked about how during that experience, I worked full-time in a lab and how much independence I had in that lab setting, and I was in control of my own experience, especially my day-to-day and learning in the lab, and how that differed from my undergrad experience, where because it was research attached to a course, it was very limited and the project was kind of already like planned out. So I would say the better you can speak about an experience, that's what counts. That's the most important thing.
Cool. Check the live stream one more time. No questions. So I don't see any more questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on a Friday afternoon, evening, or really late night, depending on where you are. I wish everyone luck in the writing process. Oh, we have one more question. How can we contact you in the future?
Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm kidding. No, but actually my Twitter is @densneurons. That's DENNS_neurons. Also email CL. If you're looking for people to review your statements, do send CL an email. And someone will be in touch with you for sure. There's that. But like Jessica said, we wish you guys all the best of luck. Don't be too hard on yourself. Always remember that there's always room for growth, and this is a process. Do not expect to get your statement perfect on the first try. Whatever institution you're meant to end up at, you will. You guys are awesome and you'll be successful.
All right, then. All right, I don't see any more questions. I put Dennisha's Twitter in the answered portion to that question if anyone is interested. If you don't have Twitter, just feel free to contact the general Científico Latino email. It's not just us who are behind it. There's a whole team of us. So someone will definitely get back to you. All right, then with that, yeah, thank you so much for joining us once again. And this video will be uploaded onto YouTube within the next couple of days if you want to review anything that was said. All right, then. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dennisha.